GamingBolt presents 15 things The Witcher 3 did that other AAA RPGs simply couldn't do. It may have taken a while to get going, but this current generation of gaming has really come into its own over the past 2 to 3 years. From Bloodborne to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, from Overwatch to Metal Gear Solid 5, from Horizon Zero Dawn to Super Mario Odyssey, we've been treated to one instant classic after another, and of course, then there's The Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt. What a special game The Witcher 3 is. It is a game that delivers on multiple fronts and delivers strongly, and perhaps rightly so. It's been called by many not only among the best games of this generation, but one of the greatest video games to have ever been made. And we certainly agree with that notion. In this feature, we're going to take a look at what made The Witcher 3 as great as it was, its greatest strengths, the things that stand out the most, the things that it could do that so many other big-budget AAA RPGs these days simply fail to do. Of course, we're not claiming that The Witcher 3 is the greatest RPG of all time. Well, it's certainly up there, but there are just so many things that it does so well that other games in the same genre fail to recreate, which is what we're going to be talking about in this feature. With all of that out of the way, let's jump right in. Balancing narrative and open world. The problem with most open world games you play is that in order to provide players with a sandbox to mess about in and give them complete freedom to go wherever they want and do whatever they want, they have to sacrifice in the narrative and storytelling department. The Witcher 3 is one of those few exceptions to that rule, because not only does it provide players with a large, beautiful open world to explore to their heart's content, it also tells a riveting tale. Now, granted, its main story doesn't have the best pacing, but even when you're taking on side quests or dabbling in random activities around the game world, mostly everything you do somehow contributes to the game's larger narrative. The Witcher 3 manages to expertly tell a driven and cohesive narrative inside of a massive open world, and it does it all wonderfully. The world itself. The world that The Witcher 3 is set in is, without a doubt, one of the stars of the show. Every nook and cranny is brimming with personality, every place feels alive and lived in, and the world and everything and everyone in it continues to exist regardless of Geralt's involvement. From the urban heights of Novigrad to the unique charms of Skellige, the game continues to delight players with excellent locations and engaging activities. Rather than being a world meant to facilitate sandbox play for players like most open world maps are, The Witcher 3's world is a character in and of itself, meant to be experienced as the developers built it, and it's absolutely stunning. Attention to detail. One of The Witcher 3's most applause-worthy attributes is its insane amount of detail CD Projekt Red crammed into the game. The world that Geralt occupies continues to live on persistently regardless of the player, and yet always responds to the player's actions. It feels real, and this authenticity helps a great deal with the immersion. From the way the trees sway in a storm to the slow and constant in-game growth of Geralt's hair and facial hair, there was just a ridiculous amount of tiny details in this game. The side quests. For a long time, most video games, and not just RPGs, had fallen into a rut. One where they felt like side quests were only boxes that needed to be ticked, that they were only to be included in the game because it was customary, so you wouldn't ordinarily see that much quality in that area. Lately, there have been a refreshing wave of games that have excellent side quests, and there's a case to be made that it all started with The Witcher 3. Of course, that's not to say that it was the first game to have great side quests, but quality of writing in the game's secondary stories was at par with the main story itself, and sometimes even exceeding it. The Bloody Baron's storyline and the Skellige succession story are not even part of the main narrative, and yet they rank as some of the best material in the entire game, with some of the most memorable quests. Even some of the shorter side quests in The Witcher 3, with more isolated stories, were top-notch. The writing. And this right here, of course, has to be the game's biggest strength. You see a lot of ambitious games in the market that want to tell stories of massive scope or incredibly complex narratives. And while these concepts also seem great on paper, they're usually lacking in execution. The Witcher 3 is a game that has consistently excellent writing. It's dark and moody, but it's also funny and incredibly dry. Every person you meet in the story has a fleshed out personality, and every interaction with them is engaging. The events that occur around Geralt as you progress through the game are riveting, from various battles to meeting the witches of Crookback Bog. It's a game that immerses you like few others. The characters. Of course, a story can only be as good as the characters that tell it, and The Witcher 3's cast is excellent. Geralt is a great protagonist who can be dangerously frightening, sharp, and funny, or kind and surprisingly human. The characters that surround him are also excellently written and developed, from Triss to Yin and Ciri to Vesemir. And then there are the secondary characters, many of whom are in many ways even more memorable than the main cast. The Bloody Baron, Lambert, Keira Metz, Dandelion. These are just some of the incredible characters in The Witcher 3. Morality. One of the things that made The Witcher 3's narrative as engaging as it was, including even the smaller secondary stories, was that the game handled morality very well. Rather than going for a gamey karma system like most games used to go with until very recently, The Witcher 3 went with the approach that there were no clear good and bad choices. It spins complex and layered tales that gave you both bright and ugly sides of every person in every situation you encountered, and having to make choices in such situations where you were driven more by what effect your actions would have rather than whether something is pure black or pure white made for a lot of excellent moments. And that, of course, leads us to our next point. Actual consequences. A lot of games claim to let players shape the story with their own actions, but few of them manage to make good on that promise as well as The Witcher 3 did. The choices you made as Geralt in the game were not memorable just because they presented interesting dilemmas, but because your choices actually carry weight. The world and the story going forward actually respond to your choices, sometimes in drastic ways. And once again, this leads us to our next point. Multiple endings. Most of these huge choices you make in The Witcher 3 change the last hours of the game and the ending itself in significant ways. Now, it's true that The Witcher 3 is far from being at the top of the list when it comes to games with multiple endings that are vastly different. However, the game still has a number of possible endings, and the fates of the characters in the world itself are wildly different in these endings, depending on your actions throughout the rest of the game. Even in the last few hours of the game, which characters survive and which characters die can change based on other alliances you may or may not have made earlier in the game. World building and lore. The Witcher 3 is an immersive game, and while there's plenty of reasons for that, one of the most important has to be the incredible way it builds its world. Every place you visit feels like it has history and a nature of its own. Every person you meet has something interesting to say, and there are interesting bits of backstory and lore all around the world. Reading about the monsters in a bestiary can be surprisingly fun at times, while learning about the political entanglements plaguing cities like Novigrad is fascinating as well. Atmosphere. Things such as attention to detail, well-written NPCs, and world building all make for a very immersive experience, but there's a much more nebulous concept that we haven't spoken about yet: atmosphere. The Witcher 3 is a game with incredible atmosphere. Places like Novigrad, Skellige, and Velen are all wildly different from each other, with unique physical traits, locations, people, and storylines, and yet each of them feel truly alive. The cities feel like they have actually been lived in, the wilds and the fields feel lush and untamed. Each place in the game feels real, and it pulls you into the game like nothing else. Not a lot of bugs after patches. Look, it's no secret that when The Witcher 3 launched, it was a very buggy game, but CD Projekt Red have supported the game since its release in excellent ways, and after patches, many of which didn't take long to come out, The Witcher 3 does an impressive job of squashing bugs. This is a large game, and there's a lot of wheels turning behind the scenes, and considering all of that, the level of polish and quality on display here is surprising. Of course, the game isn't completely devoid of bugs, and a few of them crop up every once in a while, but these occurrences are far less common than most open-world games you see. Visuals. The Witcher 3 is a beautiful game. It looks excellent and runs incredibly well on consoles, and on high-end PCs it can look absolutely stunning. The world is full of visual detail, from what the monsters and beasts you run into look and move like, to the way the roads and environment look wet and damp after a storm, to the detailed and unique architecture of the game's bigger cities. Gwent. Who could have expected that a card minigame in The Witcher 3 would become as popular as Gwent managed to be? Though it was only a minigame within the game itself, Gwent was one of the best things about the game. It was fun and it was addictive, and the game made great use of it in some of the Gwent dedicated side quests and activities. Playing against any shopkeepers or other players you ran into was always enjoyable, while collecting and hunting down the rare cards also had a unique joy of its own. The fact that it went on to spawn an individual spin-off game itself speaks volumes about how much players loved Gwent. The DLCs. DLC is a hard thing to get right. Not all developers know how much to hold back from the main game. Too often, people find that the content that they receive isn't really worth what they paid for. The Witcher 3, however, has 2 excellent DLC packs, both with a ridiculous amount of content. While Hearts of Stone has about 10 to 15 hours worth of content, Blood and Wine by itself is so meaty that it could have been released as a separate game in and of itself, with over 30 hours of gameplay on offer. On top of that, both episodes feature excellent stories, memorable new characters, and more of the excellent writing and atmosphere that the base game itself is characterized by. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.